with the first one that was supposed to happen, it was delayed because of the snow. So the talk on marijuana is going to be March 27th, so a month from today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. Dr. Hancock is a local therapist who specializes in men's mental health. He also does work with trauma. And I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself further and get this going. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate seeing so many faces around this hot topic. You know, this has been up in our awareness in our society for a little over a year now. And I've got to be honest, as the health district asked me to do this, my first thought was, do I know anything about men? Like, can I get up here and talk for men? Like, really? It's kind of a loaded thing. But then I thought, I have been working with men for a few years now, and I'll say more about that in a minute. And so my hope tonight is that I can share a little bit of my experience, a little bit of what the data shows and what some of the research and the APA is showing, and give you all some tools and solutions for how to empower yourselves if you are a male-bodied and male-identifying individual, or if you have men in your life that you know might be struggling. Hopefully some of these ideas and tools and tips will help you with that too. So hopefully you'll leave tonight with some new ideas as well to be able to apply and implement, because as we all know, men like solutions, right? So there will be some solutions tonight. So before we dive into all of that though, I want to start with a quote. When you plant lettuce, and if it doesn't grow well, you don't blame the lettuce, right? You look for reasons that it's not doing well. It might need fertilizer or more water or less sun, but you never blame the lettuce. Yet if we have problems with our friends or our family, we blame the other person. But if we know how to take care of them, they will grow well like the lettuce. Blaming has no positive effect at all, nor does trying to persuade using reason or argument. That is my experience. No blame, no reasoning, no argument, just understanding. If you understand and you show that you understand, you can love and the situation will change. So I wanted to start with that quote because that's what I see happening a lot when we start talking about gender issues. All these things are happening in the world right now, about sexual assault and about, the men are doing this, there's toxic masculinity and this, and then, but women, and, no, let's stop the blame and let's look for understanding, some deeper understanding. That's my hope for tonight. And I really like this quote too because no blame, no reasoning, no argument, just understanding. I'm a little nervous getting up here and talking about men and men's work tonight because the man that I used to be probably didn't want to hear some of the things that I'm going to say tonight. And those younger parts of me are still a little scared to get up and say these things tonight. So, no blame, no reasoning, no argument, just understanding. If you can take away a little bit of understanding tonight, maybe you can have a little bit more love, a little bit more acceptance, and the situation will change, whether that situation is you or that situation is a male-identifying human in your life. So why should you listen to me? Well, first of all, don't. That's my hope too, is that you don't listen to me, but if you identify as a man or a masculine-oriented person, or if you know people that are in your life that identify as a male or a masculine human, listen to them, listen to yourself. That's what I hope, is that we can open a conversation tonight. I hope that there'll be some time for some conversation and dialogue when I'm done talking as well. Why does this matter? As we already talked about, it's been in society for a long time. But even if we forget about present day and age, what's the first question that people ask when a woman is pregnant? Is it going to be a boy or a girl? Do you know? Like, why is this so important? Oh, it doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. Yes, gender matters. Like, gender is underlying a lot of things. It looks different. It feels different. There's different rules. There's different norms. And gender matters. So we have to look at what all is involved with that. Um, a little bit of background: before I became a psychotherapist, I was a software developer. My undergrad degree was in computer science. And logic, rationality, that was the only reality in the world, according to my worldview at that time as a young computer programmer who lived in the South. I grew up in North Florida, which is really the South. I was adopted. I was raised by a conservative Christian family, and there were very clear rules about what it meant to be a man. And especially when I was young, I was like, yeah, all right, I'm going to be a good man. This is what I'm going to do. And part of that was logic and rationality, right? We can solve every problem with the right thinking, the right tools, the right logic. That's where you go first, right? And there's all kinds of other rules, too, that I might get into a little bit later. But let me just say that my experience growing up as a man was very defined. After a period of time in my 20s, I was very successful financially, computer programming, paid well back then, still does. But man, I was not happy, staring at a screen all day, probably drinking a little bit more than I should, because it was really trying to cope and cover up some of that unhappiness. And long story short, moved to Colorado, found my way to grad school. Like, if you would have asked me back then that I was going to be a therapist, I'd laugh in your face. And there's still even a little part of me like, really? I'm a therapist? I talk to people about problems and feelings all day long. And yeah, it's important. It's really important to look at these things and know these things and work on these things. And, you know, even when my early days of being a therapist, I've been a therapist for 9 years in private practice, worked at CSU Health Center for a little bit. I worked at the Workforce Center. I really focused on career in my early days as well, because I still didn't want to deal with feelings. No, let's just have the right career, right? And that'll make everything better. But as my story showed, no, that doesn't necessarily make everything better. There's much more to it as well. But in my early days of private practice, I still used to think these things that I'm going to say tonight didn't really matter, right? Still logic, reason, still problem solve, still change the situation, everything's going to be fine. But I've been working, and I didn't even like working with men, because men were harder to work with. Like, what's the stereotype? Women are good talking about things. Women are good with their feelings. And so as a therapist, my job was much easier if I was working with women. So I didn't even like working with men at the beginning of my time as a therapist. But you know what? More men came, because men need help too. And eventually, over time, I had to learn, well, okay, if men are coming and, oh, wait, I'm a male-identified person here, I should probably know something about men, and I should know how to work with men. And so what I'm going to talk to you tonight is, first, a little bit about why it's really important to focus on men, why we need specific lens on working with men, but then also some of my experience working with all my clients. And I've been running a men's group in my private practice for almost 2 years now. I ran some shorter-term men's groups earlier on, many years ago. And I've sat in men's groups, both informal, with just gathering other friends together, and also men's groups with the Mankind Project. And one of the tools we're going to talk about tonight is something that is used heavily in that group as well. So I've worked with a lot of different men, from the most rational computer programmer type to I worked with some folks when I used to work at the CSU Challenge course that were heavy substance abusers and incarcerated folks. I've worked with all kinds of men, all different walks of life. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is true for all men. We lean different directions based on our upbringing, but what I'm going to talk about tonight is true for all men. But that's just my story. I challenge you to think about your story tonight as we're going through some of these things, and think about how these things can apply to you. And before I go any farther, I've got to give some acknowledgments and gratitude, because I wouldn't be standing here talking about this if it wasn't for all the men that have been in my life, all the clients that have taught me some of these things, my own friends, all my buddies, you know, that we used to play sports or watch sports, or all the men I've sat in a circle with, my biological parents that I didn't know anything about, my adoptive parents that had very strict rules. So the men that were there in my life, the men that were not there, all have had important lessons for me. So my family, my teachers, my mentors, my friends, so many people have been in my life, men and women, but especially the men I want to give thanks for, and the men that have come here tonight. Thank you for being willing to learn about yourself tonight. And I'm doing this, even though it's uncomfortable, because I have a son of my own, I have nephews of my own, I have nieces of my own, and a daughter. And so I believe that the more we can help create healthier men, we can have healthier relationships, we can have healthier women, and it's going to help our children as well. So I want to give thanks to all the people that have taught me, and I'm doing this because I care about all these people that I'm naming there. Again, this is a really hot topic, right? So a couple of assumptions and disclaimers, a couple of terms. I'm going to generalize a lot just to aid with communication, but this is a very complicated topic. When we talk about male or female, we're talking about sex. And there are biological differences in human bodies. Most commonly, we talk about sex as referring to different genitalia or different components of the body related to reproductive organs. And there's differences in hormones and neurotransmitters and things like this that are happening between male and female bodies. Male and female sex, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about men and women. But then there's gender as well. So when we talk about gender, I talk about masculinity and femininity. And these are gender identities and social roles that if you study other cultures, there's different rules for what it means to be a man, and there's different rules for what it means to be a woman all over the world. There's different rules for what it means to be a man with every man in this room, every woman in this room, and so there's no one way. But there are a lot of expectations about what that means. Like I said, when I grew up, from my dad and from my society that I grew up in the South, there was really clear rules about this is what it means to be a man. And it's not that black and white. It's not that binary, especially when we start talking about sexual orientation, we start talking about transgender. There's a lot of variation in what it means to be male-bodied, female-bodied, masculine, or feminine. And I'm going to use those words to help with communication. But at the end of the day and at the end of the night, my hope is that you can find your version, because that's how you're going to be the healthiest and strongest, when it's like, this is what it means to be this human being that I am, in the ways that I identify as being masculine, in the ways I identify as being feminine. So that's what we're talking about when we start to use some of these terms. There's a lot of variation there. And I'm not going to get into all the nuances tonight because I want to cover a broad range as much as I can. So, again, why are we talking about men's mental health, right? Men are just fine. Notice I put just fine in quotes, right? Just, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, I'm good. Yeah, men are just fine, right? And when you look at our society, there's still a wage gap. Men still earn more than women for the same jobs. Statistics I looked at are differing, so I didn't put any with this. And there are more men in leadership positions in government than in private sector. Despite all the media about all the women elected to government this last fall, still only 23% in our federal government are women. So men have all the power, right? Men have all the money. Why do we need to focus on men's mental health? Well, men are still really suffering. And sometimes because of the power and privilege that men have, men feel like they don't have a right to complain. They don't have a right to say, oh, yeah, life's not easy right now. This is really hard. Yeah, I'm actually feeling kind of depressed. So, and we're going to look at some of the statistics on that. But men are suffering, and men are often suffering alone and silently. Another reason why we're talking about this is the mind is one of the most important parts of the human body, right? It controls so much. And while everybody goes to the doctor, very few people will actually go and figure out, how do I work with my mind? How do I work with my emotions? How do I work with relationships that are really important, like partners and children and friends and things like this, right? These are some of the most important parts of life, And very few people receive training and education on how these things work, and men are less likely to seek this out. Relationships are super important for our mental health. Again, going with stereotypes for a second, women are generally better at relationships and talking things out and making time for that sort of thing. Men are good at doing activities. Again, overgeneralizing here. But men need to be supported in developing healthy relationships. And because of some of the social norms, it's harder to make that happen. Lastly, gender stereotypes do exist. I'm using them tonight because it's easier to communicate, but without being very intentional and conscious about the gender stereotypes, those stereotypes can be very limiting, and sometimes they impair men's mental health. Few numbers. About 152 million men in the United States. Of those 152 million men, 1 in 5 experience alcohol dependence. This town is especially interesting to work with around alcohol and substances because it's craft, right? It's art. How many breweries are we up to now? I don't know how many breweries, right? And it's a social experience. It's a bonding experience. Nothing wrong with going out and having a beer with your buddies, of course, except for when we're not getting beyond that point, right? 1 in 5 will experience alcohol dependence. 6 million men suffer from depression each year. Looking at some of the data from the National Institute of Mental Health, of diagnosis of anxiety, 24% of women, 14% of men, 8.5% women diagnosed with depression, 4.8% of men are diagnosed with depression. When we look at any mood disorder at all, which also includes things like bipolar, females 11.1%, men 7.7%. So are women worse off mentally than men? No. I don't think so. Why are these numbers lower?
Men don't seek help.
Because men don't seek help. Why don't men seek help? Well, there's lots of reasons, right? Where did my slide go? Oh, I lost the slide in there somewhere. Oh, there it is. This is such a hot topic that the American Psychological Association came out with guidelines for working with boys and men. And there's some really good things about this, and one thing that, had a big effect on me. Talked about masculine ideology and how it's held sway over large segments of the population, and some of the traits about masculine ideology the APA talks about are anti-femininity, achievement orientation, eschewal of the appearance of weakness, and adventure, risk, and violence. That's what the APA says. That's what a masculine ideology is. Is there something wrong with those things? Well, maybe, some of them. But adventure, risk, like sometimes we need those things, right? Like, so a lot of men are like, well, is masculinity under attack? I want to tell you tonight, like, there's nothing wrong with masculinity. We need adventure. We need risk, right? Especially with our young boys. They need to be challenged. Violence in the right environment? Maybe. We can debate about that one. But in the right environment, if you're trying to protect a loved one that's about to be harmed, is violence wrong? It's really dangerous to put all of these things in the same basket and say that masculinity is a problem. And so tonight I really want to look at more of the subtle nuances of these things. Some of the things that are helpful about the research the APA put out, for sure, is that conforming to traditional masculinity has been shown to limit male psychological development, constrain their behavior, and negatively influence mental health. So, especially young boys, they're told to sit in class all day, right? Boys want to be active, right? Who do you think has more ADHD diagnoses, boys or girls? Boys, right? Why is that? Because they're told to sit all day long. They have to constrain their behavior, and then they take on this message of, there's something wrong with me. I keep getting in trouble with my teacher. I keep getting in trouble with my parents. But maybe they just need to be active, right? There's more to ADHD than that. Again, I'm oversimplifying. But to point out how some of these definitions of masculinity and what's natural about boys and men are actually really important and need to be fostered. Another important finding from this 36-page document, I think it is, that men are less likely to be diagnosed with internalized disorders like depression, and they're more likely to be diagnosed with externalizing disorders like conduct disorder, which is essentially a nice way of saying like your behavior is a problem and you're causing lots of problems for other people, so your conduct is a problem. But a lot of what that is acting out from some of the internal experience, because men don't have a place and aren't taught that it's okay to actually be aware of what's happening inside. And if it's not coming out in behavioral problems, sometimes it's coming out in substance use disorders. Again, it's acting out in external ways rather than internal ways. So a little bit more data just to prove the point, because that's one of the things. Terry Real is a guy who's written a lot of books like I Don't Want to Talk About It on male depression. He's also got a lot of great books on relationship. And one of the things he talks about with working with men is that men will only address the issue when it's really clear, like, this is an issue that needs to be solved, right? So that's why I'm using some of this data here tonight, hopefully to convince you that, like, this is a real thing. Like, men do need to have this place to do this work. So prevalence of any mental illness among all U.S. adults in 2016, 21% of females, 21.7%, 14.5% of males. Still a large number. Again, I think it's being really underreported because of the lack of seeking help. Things get really more complicated, as you can see in this data, when we start talking about race and ethnicity, any sort of form of minority, when we talk about gender or sexual orientation. Also, these numbers are really greatly affected as well. Talking about gender issues and sexuality and things like that, a little bit more than I can get into tonight. But know that that really complicates things when we start to bring those into the equation as well. Mental health treatment received in the past year. Again, 48.8% of females were willing to seek treatment when they recognized that they had a mental health issue of some sort, and only 33.9% of males were able to do that. So there is a huge gap in seeking help here. And finally, one of the most, and this is the last statistic I have for you tonight before we start talking about more interesting things and solutions. Of all suicides in 2017, 75% were male. This is one of the scariest stats, in my opinion. And the reason why is that men are much more effective. When I used to work crisis work at the hospital, some of the most difficult and scariest cases that we get in would be the man that has never sought help before, never seen a therapist, never been to the hospital except for maybe like when they were really sick, and they said, you know, I've been thinking about suicide a little bit. Because you know what? That statement, just a little bit, really means a lot of bit. If somebody really took the effort to drive out from eastern Colorado and show up at the hospital and connect with services, it means it's really bad, but it's really difficult to talk about. 75% of the suicide completions in 2017 were male because men wait way too long to seek help, and they're very effective. All right, I'm going to do this. I've got the means. I know exactly how to do it, right? That's why men are more effective at completing suicide than women. They wait, they're serious, they do it, they follow through, they have lethal means. So we can't let it get to this point. 40% of men don't want to talk to anyone about it for some of these beliefs, right? I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to appear weak. I can just deal with it on my own. I don't know who to talk to. And this is a real thing too, by the way. We do have a real shortage of mental health staff. Even though there's like hundreds of therapists on Psychology Today, Connections does a really great job, Summit Stone's doing a great job of trying to meet this need in this community, there's still a gap. There's still a need for more services than what we have. In Europe, there's 50 mental health staff for 100,000 people. In the United States, only 28. Suicide accounts for 2.5% of all deaths among men, 7th leading cause of death. Over 33,000 men die from suicide each year. And it's the second most common cause of death for every age group from men 10 to 39. It's like, these are really scary statistics. That's why it's so important that we start having these conversations around men's mental health. So, these three concepts have been really huge to me, and I think they're especially relevant when we start talking about men and mental health. What makes life worth living? Because that's why people kill themselves, right? Life isn't worth living anymore. What makes life worth living? Identity, purpose, and community. First encountered these three words together in an article a couple years ago by Christian Piccolini, I believe his name was. He was a former white supremacist that started talking out about, like, here's why people join hate groups. Here's why people join gangs. Because they're looking for this. They're looking for identity. Yeah, I know who I am. I've got a reason here. Yeah, like this is my task. I've got a job to do. I've got these skills. I can do this, and yeah, and I've got purpose, and I've got people that support me in this. You know, never mind that sometimes those can get misguided into causing harm to other people. But these things are so important that Christian Piccolini talks about, like, this is why he was seeing people joining some of these hate groups that he was a part of for a lot of his life. We start talking about this in healthy ways, and you can see why, oh yeah, this is really important. One thing I see a lot, especially with older men, is that around retirement or when there's layoffs or things like this, mental health really suffers because the identity is gone. Like, I used to be a computer programmer, and now I don't have a job, and I've been trying to get a job for years. And who am I? I don't have any purpose. I don't have any worth anymore, right? Maybe you sitting in the room know that that's not really true, but that's some of the thought process that happens, right? Purpose, being able to provide for the family or accomplish this mission or something like that happens with job and employment. Again, like, without that, or without a clear definition of what that is, mental health really struggles. Doesn't matter what the purpose is. One of my mentors was a school janitor. Like, it doesn't matter what the purpose is, as long as it's something that resonates and identifies with you, and you can say, yeah, I'm glad I do this with my life. This is an important part. And then community, this is where men fall short a lot too. Unless they're a part of social organizations or churches or organizations like that, it's really hard to have community. The older we get, the longer we go on without fostering those relationships, the more isolated we get, and the farther away we fall from community. But all three of these things are super important. And in my own line of work, in addition to being a therapist, I've been involved with rites of passage work for over a decade here too. And these three things are the pillars of what happens when people really take the time to look deeply into themselves and figure out, oh, who am I? What are my gifts? Why does it matter that I have those gifts and I'm sharing those gifts? And who are the people that I'm giving those gifts to? Those are really important questions for everyone to be answering, and these are super important questions for men. So, thankfully, yeah, you have a question?
Can you back up a second?
Uh-huh.
You just hit a real important part.
Sure.
If you work with rites of passage, that's one of the issues that I think that men don't have, is to be able to identify a rite to passage.
Yes.
And no offense to the women in the group, but they get a pretty good idea when they're women. Guys don't really have any rite of passage, whether it be something like the old books Iron John or Fire in the Belly or something. There's still a lot of men that are looking for that answer, other than it being, if I make $100,000 a year, then I must have made it. There's no rite of passage, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. And I'd love to talk about rites of passage for a couple hours too, but I will just amplify what you're saying, that is that the rites of passage that we do have a lot of times are around college, or maybe alcohol, binge drinking, drugs, like things like that. Like people find their own way into a rite of passage, but it's incomplete and it's ineffective because because it's missing some of these components, right? And without real intentional mentors and guidance into, oh, this is what it meant. You know, like, oh yeah, this was your community, and this is what you learned in that journey. You know, so you're absolutely right. There are some rites of passage, but in our society they're kind of weak and they're incomplete. And I think that's part of the challenges with adolescent behavior and conduct disorders and things that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, you go off on a long tangent on that, but you're right. Thank you for amplifying that. I appreciate that. So, what's the solution? You know, today's day and age changed a little bit. You know, everyone has GPS in their phone practically now, and so the old cliche about men not asking for directions like doesn't apply as much anymore. But since that's true, let's just go with that, right? If men aren't going to ask for directions, fine, great. I'm going to give you a map right here, and that's the handout that I got for you tonight. And we'll talk about this in some depth here. And again, this is something we could go in a lot farther detail and depth with. That I'd like to think of it as that we all have these different modes, right? Sometimes the fear of like the anti-feminization that their APA was talking about, men talk like they don't want to be associated with feelings, right? But men feel. And sometimes we like to think that thinking is the answer to everything, like was my early experience in life. But thinking is just one part of it. Thinking is important. Feeling is important. Doing things is important. Having the bigger picture, purpose, meaning, you know, observational skills about like what's my role in the world, like what's my life map, like that sort of thing. The bigger picture way of being is important as well. They're all important. It's not black and white. It's not men and women. It's not this or that. Those are cognitive distortions, thinking that it's that simplistic. It's not. It's more complex than this. Here's 4 modes that we're going to look at. And we can go into a lot more detail of all of this. Even this is an oversimplification in a way. The goal of these things is to utilize each mode at the right time and at the right place, and to be able to choose when the right time and the right place is. So to be balanced and be in the center, have choice of how we're showing up, choice of our relationship with ourselves, choice of relationship with others. That's ultimately the point of this map. I want to make it clear that too much of any of these things or too little of any of these things is also a problem. Let's just start with thinking, for example. So thinking, you know, being able to reflect on ourselves, reflect on our life, reflect on our situation, using good judgment, good evaluation, logic, intuition, problem solving, being able to see multiple options, multiple possibilities. That's great. Essential skill. I also have many men that come in my office that get stuck here, right? And they never take action. So there's analysis paralysis. Like too much thinking and never taking action is a problem. Or another thing that I see in my practice a lot, this was my problem as well earlier in my life, so much thinking, so much problem solving, so much analysis that can't connect with other people. Couldn't connect with my partner, right? She had issues with me. These are great skills for computer scientists and engineers and researchers at CSU, but there's other skills that are needed too. These aren't the best skills when we're talking about relationships with our kids or our partners, right? So we got to have another skill set for that, which would be more in the feeling category. The feeling is about connection. It's about play. It's about passion. It's about sensuality, empathy. Fun fact, some of the recent neuroscience talks about mirror neurons being the backbone of empathy. So mirror neurons are when you're sitting in the room with somebody and you start to feel a little bit what they feel, guys are really good at this when, maybe you're watching football and someone takes a big hit and you go, oh, right? That's your mirror neuron system, empathizing with that guy that just got hit, right? We can all do this. The more we can be aware that we need to do this and do it at the right times in the right place, it's going to open up more of the possibilities for the relationships that we're talking about are missing for a lot of men. I also talk about this in terms of emotional competency. Many men will have this anger is the only emotion, right? Anger or numb. But there's also sadness, there's love, there's joy, there's fear, there's shame. Being able to have some awareness around these feelings, at least for yourself, maybe even be able to communicate them with someone else, I think that's an important life skill. Too much of this, by the way, like I said, too much, too little of each of these can each cause their own problems. So too much feeling, especially if it's I've got to feel good all the time, that can lead to addiction. Give me pleasure, give me substance, give me sex, give me this. I just want to feel good, right? I want to just feel a lot and I want to feel good. Sometimes risk-taking behaviors, give me the adrenaline, right? I want to feel something. If there's too little feeling, it's numb and checked out, disconnected, and then sometimes people will bounce back and well, give me the big feeling, right? So having awareness of these things and being able to balance with them is super important. But of course, all thinking and all feeling is no way to be effective in life. We also need doing, right? So being clear about being able to take action. All right, cool. I know what I've got to do. I've got to say something to this person in my life. Now I'm going to show up and I'm going to do it. But the doing part is about having goals, integrity, owning that power I was talking about. Power is not a problem when it's used at the right time and in the right place. Used in the wrong time, in the wrong place, that's when it causes a problem. So we can't talk about masculinity, especially aggression, being a problem, because sometimes there's the right time and the right place for it. We can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. Being decisive, detached, at times when it's time to do something, right? Sometimes there's work to be done and you can't think about, oh, I don't feel like doing this, right? You're getting stuck in feeling, lack of motivation, because you're I don't really want to do this. I feel like crap. I'm tired. Sometimes it's time to tune out the feelings and just get something done, right? So different modes at different times. In excess, there's workaholism, right? Workaholism, sometimes it's a badge of honor. And it's yeah, I'm really good. I'm earning a lot of money, and I'm really successful, and I'm working 70 hours a week, and yeah, I'm doing really good, right? But, are you enjoying life? Are your friends happy? Do you spend time with friends, your family, your partners? Too much doing is a problem too, right? Obviously, too little doing is a problem as well. So again, recognizing when is the right time and the place, keeping that in balance. And then what are you doing and why are you doing it? That question is answered from some of these things. The being, right? So the big picture vision, being able to access your own inner wisdom of this is what my life is about. This is what I want to do with my time on earth. Having some leadership over yourself and over your life. Taking care of yourself, knowing that, wow, I'm thinking too much, or I'm feeling too much, or I'm doing too much. I need a little self-care. I need a break. I need a little rest. Caring for your friends, caring for your family, and caring for people in your life. So caring for, affirming, empowering other people. The more that you do that for others, that has an effect on yourself as well. The being part also is about inclusivity and fairness, and it's about speaking out and giving voice to those things that are really important to you and really important in taking care of other people in the world, other people in your life, right? So these 4 modes, by the way, this is based on the work of Carl Jung a long, long time ago that was then popularized in, I believe it's 50s or 60s. Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette started doing some work around masculine archetypes. And I've kind of adapted this in terms of sometimes those things are a little too out there for some men for various reasons. And so really distilled this down into this model of thinking, feeling, being, and doing, because everyone can relate to, there's 4 different modes, 4 ways of being. Not one is better than the other. They're all equally important. They're all equally valid, right? Any questions about any of those things before I move on? Yes?
What's your definition of detached?
Detached means, like the example I gave was like, all right, now is the time to do. I'm not going to think about how this feels. Or I'm not going to think about if this is the best thing to be doing, because I've already done that. I did my time thinking and planning and looking at the impact and the outcome, and now it's the time to just put that aside and just do. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sometimes guys will get a bad rap because they're like, guys are always detached and they're always just workaholics, or they're always not thinking about the impact of others. Uh-oh. So, again, hopefully this comes back up. Uh-oh. Can you get me logged back in there, Jenna? If you're always operating in that mode, that's a problem. Sometimes it's an important mode. You know, I have a lot of people that come in and, you know, they're like, I know what I need to do, but I just can't do it. Sometimes it's because the feelings are getting in the way, or sometimes the analysis paralysis is getting in the way. Sometimes it's time to detach from that and just do it, right? Right time in the right place. That answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions about the model, or, oops, I already went ahead to the next slide.
Do you base this?
Go ahead, Mark.
Do you base this off the 4 shields?
Again, this is it's based on Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette archetypes, but there is a correlation to the 4 shields that you're talking about for sure as well. Yeah, that's why I've kind of put these things together for this presentation, but you're right, there is correlation to that. Yes, sir?
I had a really nice PhD psychologist lady told me one time about talking to men about feelings.
Uh-huh.
That they learned at CSU that men only have 3 feelings: mad, sad, and glad. Don't go any farther.
That's a limiting belief, though, right?
I know.
Men have more feelings than that.
agree.
Yeah. There's mad, sad, glad, fear, shame, and guilt, at least. Yeah.
In what way would someone use this as a tool?
Yeah, great question. So as a self-assessment type tool, really just checking in with each, all right, what am I feeling about this? What am I thinking about this? Like, what is the bigger reason for this? What actions need to have for this? So there's kind of some self-assessment that can happen with each of these things. It's a model I kind of use in my own work as I'm working with someone. Sometimes I'll teach the model directly. Sometimes I'm just thinking about it. What's the missing piece? Like, is this person thinking so much? If so, how do I get them into feeling a little bit more? Or, you know, sometimes there's guys that are feeling too much, and they're like, trying to come up with an example on the spot here. Like just really sensitive guys, and just like really like always making time, like always spending so much time with their girlfriend or their boyfriend, and you know, always into art and creativity or maybe spirituality and that sort of thing, but they're never taking action with their life, right? So recognizing like where is somebody going to default, where are they spending most of their time, and where would it be helpful to spend a little bit more time in strengthening? That make sense? Yeah. So kind of a self-assessment of like where do you go default, where do you stay away from, how do you start to strengthen those things, or at least how do you check in with each of these areas when you're facing a particular topic or a particular issue. Yeah, good questions. Any others? Okay. So, yeah, there's so much more I could be saying about that. Let's keep moving forward, though. How do you, if you recognize that there's a weakness or a deficiency, like this person never feels, or this person is like needs to get some new perspective, or really needs to look at things critically. or needs to get clearer around taking action and doing things. I've listed some ideas. I mean, there's many more, right? They just wouldn't all fit on the slide. Starting at the top with the being, it's really about stepping back and gaining perspective. So, first of all, this requires stopping. If we're doing and going all the time, we have to stop and get some perspective. Meditation is a great time. Just carving out some solo time with no agenda. What am I going to do today? I don't know. I'm going to sit here until I know what's best. Or I'm going to give myself some self-compassion or some self-leadership around, like, yeah, I think I just need a break today. I just need to go for a hike, or I just need a massage, or something like that. Asking some of these important questions that we were talking about earlier. What is your purpose? What is the identity? What are your core values? Like, what do you stand for? What's really important to you? Who are the important people in your life? How can you serve that person by being a better mentor, leader, friend to those people? And this is starting to get a little bit deeper and way beyond the presentation, but I wanted to at least put it in here, that recognizing that if you're not defining these things for yourself, some of those gender roles, the gender stereotypes, the society, parents, there's lots of other people that are defining those things for you. So taking some time to breaking away, to identifying, like, where do these rules come from? Are these rules serving me? What are my rules? And how do I start to break away from that and live life on my terms? That's what that quadrant is kind of about. So spending a lot of time with doing that. I'll move around this direction here, moving into the thinking, analyzing and evaluating. Something that can be helpful to looking at your thinking as well as answering some of these questions is getting help, like we've been talking about tonight. Get coaching, get counseling, therapy, individual, group. Lots of organizations are having lots of opportunities for this these days. Go get some outside perspective from someone, because if you stay stuck in your own mind, you're going to be stuck by your own beliefs and your own rule set without some external influence. You'll stay in the same old way that you've been doing it. Getting some outside perspective with coaching, counseling, and therapy before it gets too late, like we were talking about before, is highly recommended. But if you are someone that needs to do it on your own, journaling is great. There's great research at the University of Texas Austin that if you journal about a problem for 4 days in a row, it starts to change, it starts to shift. Sometimes people journal and they go all over the place, and that's good journaling too. But if you are working on a particular issue and how it bothers you, and you're exploring all of these avenues for 4 days in a row, for 20 minutes a day, the research shows that journaling can be really effective for that. At the very least, you might get sick of it. You're like, I'm tired of this problem. Then you move on, right? Okay, it still works. Journaling is effective. Reading books, getting new ideas. Rites of passage we mentioned earlier, super important passion of mine. And this whole section down here is really around cognitive behavioral therapy, challenging the type of thinking you have. Like, what are the shoulds? What are the rules that you have? Like, should you do this, or do you want to do this? Is it this or that, the black and white thinking? It's more than black and white. If it's only black and white for you, I challenge you to come up with more options. There's more options that could be had. The filters we have, like even the neuroscience is showing that we're aware of and perceiving so much more than we're cognitively aware of, and what enters our conscious mind is based on these filters. So what are you willing to see and what do you not want to see? Jumping to conclusions too fast, taking things personally. There's all kinds of cognitive distortions that you can work with the thinking quadrant. But thinking alone isn't enough either. Being able to get physical, take action, exercise, stretch, do a lot of nature-based work and outdoor work, because it's embodied. You know, when you're outside hiking, things move. That's how I got into therapy in the first place. Like I said, I never wanted to be a therapist, and it was backpacking with my buddy who was this highly driven, highly successful type A corporate guy that was you know, he would always open up when we'd get out there backpacking and be like, man, I haven't been thinking about things for years, and you know, we'd have the best conversations. I was like, oh yeah, sometimes we need to move our bodies, not just sit on a couch in a therapist's office, right? So sometimes moving our bodies while talking and processing is good. Sometimes moving our bodies while thinking about things is good. Sometimes it's just good to move your bodies, exercise, get physical, stretch. Martial arts is really great because it's focus, it's discipline, it's movement. Something I practice a lot. Competitive sports are great. You know, again, sometimes men fall into only doing some of these things. We want to expand and do all of these things to get more balance. Competitive sports are great. There is teamwork. There is relationship. It's not bad to do those things. We need this quadrant. Getting a little bit more fine-tuned, knowing what you're about and knowing these things and being able to hold boundaries around that. Say, yes, this is in alignment with what I want for my life and my mission, my purpose, and say, yes, I'm going to do this, like this talk tonight. Or say, no, like, yeah, I can't help you with that because that's not, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, it's not in alignment with what I want for my life, I don't have the skills. Being able to say no and yes and having clear boundaries is a part of this action and this doing about like what you're actually going to do. Having clear daily routines, defending those core values and boundaries I was talking about, setting goals and be honest and accountable about those goals and if you're achieving them without the shoulds and judgments that cause the negative feelings, right? See how all these things start to work into each other. So having goals, being honest, accountable with those goals, and it's just a yes or no question. Did you do it or not? Yes? Great. Good job. Celebrate. No? Okay. Why not? Let's go back and reevaluate, right? Just clear. Yes, no. And be accountable to things. Keeping it simple, and a simple thing that follows into this category as well is just keeping your life decluttered and clean and organized. Lastly, the feeling part. This is all about senses and sensations, right? The mirror neurons about connection, you have to be aware that that's happening, which means to actually feel what's happening in your body. And one of the ways to really emphasize and get more connected with that part of you that everybody has, again, paying attention to your five senses. Doing things that give you pleasure and enjoy the pleasure, like eating really good food and paying attention to it and enjoying it. Going outside, camping, hiking, paying attention to your five senses out there, the bird sound, the wind, the water, art, music, tapping into those softer feelings around love and emotions with partners, doing things that are fun and enjoyable, and then, of course, practicing the emotional competency of those emotional words I was using before, mad, sad, glad, afraid, shame, guilt, that sort of thing. So here's ways that you can strengthen all of those things. Any questions, comments, or anything that you would add that you're already doing or know about? Yes, sir.
Question for you is that, do you agree that men's mental health is generational? For example, yeah, a lot of this stuff is really good, positive, but once one gets to the point of being retired, then things kind of change. That's when the question of purpose comes back in.
Right.
And you have to start all over again.
I think you're right.
I think, for the benefit of those younger folks, that
Yes.
sometimes that hits, right, then you don't know what your purpose is anymore. Too many men, we've been taught that we are what we do, and when we don't do it anymore, now what?
You're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And yeah, so you do have to, especially in retirement, redefining the purpose and redefining the community, I think, are two really important things that have to happen for men. You're right.
Or just
Yes.
to add to that, you know, the stereotype of a midlife crisis,
Uh-huh.
you know, is also a redefinition. You may have spent so much time in doing and achieving a whole bunch and left other areas atrophying, and then a midlife crisis is discovering that balance is needing to be readjusted for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And I would argue that rather than waiting to those crises, like the midlife crisis or the retirement or whatever, the more you're kind of tracking these things throughout life, then those things don't hit you so hard, right? That's part of my hope of why we're talking about this tonight. Yeah.
Should be a yearly routine, right?
Yeah, yearly, quarterly,
Yeah.
at least, yeah, weekly, definitely. So, in summary, again, just to reemphasize a few things, gender matters. It's underlying everything. It's important we look at it and we talk about it. There's no right way to be a man. There's no wrong way to be a man. There's no right way to be a woman, no wrong way to be a woman. It's about you looking at what are the parts that are there for you. How is this helping? How is this serving? How is this empowering? How is this holding you back? How is this causing pain or possible mental health issues, right? Being able to look at those components is important. Masculinity is important, femininity is important. There's differences and there's similarities. It's about you and your unique expression. They're all needed. Identity, purpose, community are important components of that, being clear on those pillars and building blocks. Isolation and surface level connection really harms us all. There's nothing wrong with the gender stereotypes about men playing sports and drinking beer, unless that's the only note we know, right? We have to know other ways of being as well. And the surface level connection piece in our digital age is what I'm seeing a lot of now too, of like we think we have friends and relationships because we text a little bit, but we actually have to spend time with those people too, And we actually, social media is like this much of a relationship. We actually have to spend time with the connection with actual human beings. So isolation is bad, only surface level connection still causing some of these mental health issues that we're having. Support, understanding, not blame. If you're ever blaming women, if you're ever blaming men, let's back up. Look at yourself. How do we enhance some of these components that we've been talking about tonight? Thank you for coming. You matter. Everyone matters. Let's support the men in our lives, support each other, and mostly take care of yourselves. So I think we're about out of time, but if there's a few questions, I can hang around for a few minutes. Thank you again for coming. And if you want to get in touch with me, here's contact information. Let's continue the conversation.
And I just want to thank you, Chuck, for coming and doing this talk. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We have an evaluation form. I have a couple red pens up here. I'll track down more pens. The health district, if you have a couple minutes to fill out the evaluation, it's just feedback for us about our mental health speaker series. Any suggestions you might have for future mental health speaker series. Connections are the organization through the health district that put on the mental health speaker talk. If you want more information about that, please track me down. I'll be hanging out afterwards. Really what we do, both the adult and child, adolescent, young adult connections team, our goal is to help folks talk about their options for mental health and substance use resources in the community, meet with a therapist and kind of discuss what their goals are, hitting on some of the things that Chuck talked about tonight, and help them get connected and move forward. So if you want to know more about that, come find me. Otherwise, take some pizza home, and thank you again. And the pens are over here. They're mostly red, like I said.